Former President Donald Trump not shying away from speculation that North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum is on his VP shortlist. A new report from Axios reveals the Trump campaign believes that North Dakota governor could help close the deal in several swing states. In fact, the report says, quote, the campaign's frequent deployment of Burgum to swing and Democrat-leaning states that the Trump campaign wants to put in play has set Burgum apart from many other contenders who are trying to beat Trump's running mate. Let's bring in our political panel, Sophia Cai and Major Garrett. Sophia is a national politics reporter for Axios. Major, of course, is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent. We'll begin with you, Sophia. Axios has had this reporting. Burgum, very well liked in the Trump inner circle, but to what end? Every Trump ally I talk to says Trump loves Burgum. What does that mean based on your reporting, your conversations with your sources?
Look, Bob, Burgum is stable. He's low drama. He's also the governor of a well-run state, and those are the key things that Trump likes about him. Trump also likes that he's very loyal to his wife, and so as one Republican ally put it to me, Burgum thinks his wife is hot. And so, that's what Burgum brings to the table. I think, we've seen that play out in how frequently they've been sending Burgum to states like Nevada, states like North Carolina, but also states like Virginia and Minnesota. Those are Democratic states that the Trump campaign is trying to put in play. It gives you a sense of how they're using someone like Doug Burgum even before they've named a vice president.
Major, when you're talking to your own sources, how do they weigh Burgum? I mean, he's clearly, no one's denying, on record or even off or on background, that Trump likes him a lot.
Yeah, central casting is one thing you hear frequently. Doug Burgum looks like a vice presidential nominee. Trump has said many, many times, and I believe he's more than half serious about this, he wants someone he believes can step into the role should, as he says, the worst happen. Trump instinctively believes a two-term governor fits that bill better than any senator does. So on the leadership and the capability side and the looks side, all of which matter to Trump, Burgum fits. Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita, important voices like Doug Burgum for the reasons you just mentioned. He's stable, reliable, manageable, does not have a political organization, which means he would be dependent on their organizational signals and strategic advice. That's something that matters to both Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles because they know that they have less influence / control over former President Trump. The one thing about Doug Burgum, though, that worries some in the Trump inner circle is, does he do anything to appeal to the Nikki Haley-type Republican who is still on the sidelines? They have internal polling data in many of the swing states that those female voters are not yet sold. And so there's a conversation going on, shouldn't the former president think about someone like Kim Reynolds, Joni Ernst, Katie Britt, or someone who is, or maybe Kristi Noem, a woman who can appeal both visually, rhetorically, and from a policy perspective to those voters who are still on the sideline.
I think that's such an important point. I mean, Burgum could be an overture to a Nikki Haley voter without having to pick Nikki Haley in the sense that he's a traditional Republican. But I hear from some sources that Burgum and others are well like Senator Rubio to this point, too, that he provides social cover for suburban voters to say, well, at least this is someone who seems more like a traditional Republican. But what about Major's point? Are you hearing, is there any dark horse candidate right now who might be a female Republican out there who's on the list? I mean, is Elise Stefanik really in the mix or not?
So her name has been on this list for a while. One of the concerns that I've heard from, Trump's camp and people in his orbit is that maybe Elise Stefanik wants it a little bit too much. She's been very eager to defend Trump in terms of, his legal problems, and Trump likes that. But, Trump also wants somebody who's seen as being able to stand on their own 2 feet. And, yeah, I think one of the things that works in Elise Stefanik's favor is that, both in terms of appearance and, in that she is a woman, she may appeal to some of those suburban women who may otherwise stay away from Trump.
And, Sophia, are you hearing anything about timing from the Trump campaign of this? You have the sentencing for Trump in New York on July 11th. Then the convention starts less than a week later in Milwaukee. I remember when Romney picks Ryan in 2012, they did it a few days in advance of the convention. I could see a Friday or Saturday morning rally with the announcement the days before the convention, make sure the Sunday shows are all focused on the pick, and then the convention begins Monday. Or are they actually thinking about rolling it out at the convention?
I think it may depend on what happens with the sentencing. It may be between the sentencing and the convention, but we do know that sometime next month, former President Trump will be very likely to announce who will be on the ticket with him.
What are we missing from the Veep stakes calculation? I mean, yes, it's Trump's decision. We hear that ad nauseum.
Right.
But what are we missing?
That the vetting process is not really real. In the sense that, think about the traditional aspect of vetting. We want to go through your financial documents or your personal records to make sure there's nothing embarrassing. Trump's been convicted on 34 felonies. What are they worried? There's anything in the personal or financial background of any of these potential
Well, no political
candidates.
advisor likes a surprise.
No, but there's nothing in there that Trump doesn't believe they can't deal with, or that he's fundamentally worried about. This idea of the vetting thing is kind of just moving paper around to create the appearance of normality. It's going to come down to Trump's own gut instincts and his calculus about what he needs. The most important thing, I think, to consider is Trump thinks he's farther ahead than some of the campaign actually believe he is. They believe the swing states are closer than Trump thinks they are, and they wonder if that overconfidence could lead him in a direction for the running mate pick that might not be the most politically savvy.
And what's intriguing is that this pick will be announced after the CNN debate next week. We keep hearing from everybody, Trump's not preparing, it's informal, he's having policy discussions. Axios was reported on some of those. What's the real read on the debate inside the Trump camp from your sources?
They are preparing for it. They want to give up, the appearance of not preparing for it. Oh, Trump doesn't need to do a mock debate. And it sounds like they aren't doing a mock debate, but he's having very detailed policy discussions. One of the questions that I'm hearing that, Trump will have to figure out how to handle is the January 6th question, because no doubt it'll be one of the first topics to come up.
How's he going to handle it?
We don't know. I think when he's asked outright if the election was stolen or did Joe Biden win the election, he'll probably go about it in a very roundabout way and start talking about election integrity, which is something that his campaign has been very focused on. And it gives him a way to talk about, the quote unquote integrity of elections without straight up saying that the election was stolen.
And let me very, very quickly, an intervening factor, we may have a Supreme Court ruling on immunity, which may create a space about official acts, non-official acts, and Trump may just say, I was asking questions as President of the United States, which I'm fully authorized to do, and the Supreme Court has said that's part of my official duties. I'm golden. Won't be true, but I think that's going to be one of the places he's going to try to occupy.